Power BI just a little bit easier. So if you guys are experienced Power BI developers and you just want to sort of streamline some of the work that you might be doing in Power BI, this is the session for you. First of all, I just want to say thank you to all the event organizers who have put this on, giving me the opportunity to come here. My wife and I, we sort of fallen in love with Chattanooga. We're from Nashville, Tennessee, wonderful place also. So I hope you guys, if you want to come to Nashville, come check us out. I love being in Chattanooga. It's a wonderful place here, and I'm really excited to be here. Also want to give a big thank you to all of our event sponsors. We couldn't do this without all you guys, so thank you for that. So today, we're going to talk about automating and streamlining your life in Power BI. And so the first thing that we're going to talk about is authentication, right? So this is something that you're going to have to do in every single interaction that you do with the Power BI service, with the Power BI API. So we're going to cover this, and we'll do this in a little bit of detail. I might condense this a little bit given this audience. So. The most common thing that people want to do in Power BI is refresh a data set. So let's say that you got a nightly batch job of a data warehouse and you then want to pull from that data warehouse into a Power BI data set. As soon as that refresh is done, then you can do that mechanistically rather than, say, on a schedule, for example. You can even report back out to the broader nightly batch job whether it is a success or a failure. So if you got 24/7 monitoring, for example, you can report out on that. Another thing that's very common is querying out of a Power BI data set. So we'll cover this a bit. This is really common for ISVs, anyone who's working in any sort of Power BI embedded use case. So we'll also talk about some developer API specifically. Yeah, and we're also going to talk about some admin APIs as well. So if you guys if any of you happen to serve the function of a Power BI tenant admin, there are some functions in here that can make your life easier. Even if you're not tenant admins, my tenant admins don't really know how to do a lot of these things. I've actually had to sort of queue up a few of these things for them, so they can be helpful at times. Okay, so a couple ways to authenticate with the Power BI service. So you actually can use your own account, and so you can leverage SSO. This is really nice if you are an admin, for example, and you've got repeated tasks that you do regularly. Right? So if somebody's constantly saying, "Hey, I need a workspace, and this is the name," you can create a PowerShell script, for example, that will do that, and it just pops up a thing that says, "Yes, please use my SSO," and the authentication is super quick and easy. One nice thing about using PowerShell commandless is that it's basically making API calls under the hood, so you have pretty good parallels what you do in one place versus the other, but it does sort of obfuscate a lot of the complexities with API calls. Probably not a problem for you guys, I'm guessing, but for those who are maybe not developers, it's just nice to sort of simplify some of the complexities away. It will use, if you're using your own service account, it uses your identity, meaning that you can compartmentalize the functions that you can do. So you can give some responsibilities to some identities and different responsibilities to other folks. Like I say, it's just sort of quick and easy, and just a nice way to get something done. That's maybe takes 5 minutes, and you can reduce it down to 30 seconds or something. So it's handy for that. The other option is using service principals. So this is obviously much more robust and scalable and more appropriate for any sort of CI/CD situation, or definitely for an independent software vendor. Obviously, you don't want that sort of those sorts of things tied to anyone's identity, right? So anything that's going to be scalable, truly automated versus streamlined, you would really want to have a service principal involved. You're going to need three things for that. You're going to need a tenant ID. If you're working just for, say, Mike's working for the TVA, for example, he probably has one tenant and one tenant ID. Some people you might have a handful of tenants and tenant IDs. If you're working with an independent software vendor, you might be in a highly multi-tenancy environment. You might have to get a little bit more sophisticated with how you handle your tenant IDs, but for most of us, we've got one and it doesn't really change. Or you might have a handful and they don't change. You need a client ID, which that's just the GUID for the service principal. The terms client and service principal obviously are pretty interchangeable here, and then the client secret, so which is just your password. So, I apologize. I did make this more for Power BI developers than software developers. So if I'm diving too deep into this, just let me know. But basically, you're going to make you're going to have some sort of calling application. This can be PowerShell, it can be Python script, JavaScript, what have you, and that is going to make a post call to Microsoft. You're going to pass in the tenant ID, the client secret, and you will receive back a bearer access token. So that bearer access token has some time to live. I think it's usually about 60 minutes. To be honest, I usually get in, get my work done, and get out long before that token times out. So then you're going to pass that bearer access token in all of the subsequent things that you do. Again, if you're using a tool like PowerShell, that bearer access token, there's like a login command that you use, and it just sort of does all of that for you. So let's make that a little simpler. And so you're going to send some command to the Power BI service, and you may or may not get a response back. It just depends on the nature of your request. So in order to get the ID, so this is the URL that you're going to use, so you just put your tenant ID in the URL, client ID and client secret in the JSON body, and like I say, you're going to receive a bearer access token back, so a very long, very random string returned. And again, I know I don't have to tell you guys this, but please don't ever store your client secret in plain text. I've definitely seen this happen before, so that's why I put that up there. All right. So most common thing people want to do is refresh a Power BI data set. There actually are plenty of ways that you can do this. There's actually a Power Automate tool that can do this very, very easily, in a very straightforward manner. But this is also a way to do it as well. So just a quick little note about the URL. You can see the URL right here. I just want to call out some things that you may see differently if you Google this and look up some blogs online, or if you ask LLMs some things that they might tell you that are a little bit different from this and why you might see the differences. So where it says my org, so you can actually put the tenant ID right there and specify the tenant that you're working with. That is actually not necessary, and so it'll work without that. It'll work if you swap out my org with the tenant ID, or if you just put my org right there. So it'll work exactly the same either way. So my thought is, why make it more complicated than it needs to be, right? And I think the reason for this is because that access token is only good for for the tenant ID that you requested it for, right? So if you are in a highly multi-tenancy environment, again, you might want to test that and test the ability to, if you're deploying code to multiple tenants sort of successively, you might want to just make sure that you've got a scalable process in place. But essentially, you can just bypass your tenant ID. Another thing where you'll see differences is you'll see a lot of them have between my org and data sets, it'll say /group/group ID. So what is a group in Power BI? So in the old days of Power BI, whenever you created a workspace, it would create an Active Directory group behind the scenes. So if you see the word group in Power BI, that basically means workspace, right? And so a data set is going to exist inside of a workspace. So when you are pointing at a data set, you're pointing at a data set that resides inside of some workspace. And so the URL would say /mywork/group/ the group ID /dataset/dataset ID. Well, here's the thing. The dataset ID is unique across the entire tenant, right? Globally even. So you actually don't need to specify the group and group ID. So you can take that out of the URL as well. So again, let's simplify. I just want you to know, if you look online and you're like, well, Michael missed all this crap, he doesn't know what he's talking about. I mean, you're probably right, I don't, but but I just want you to know, this works if you take all of that complexity out. You don't need to necessarily, that's just one more thing to manage, one more thing that can break, that you can actually take out and make your life a little bit simpler, right? So even though the data set exists inside of a workspace, that ID is unique. All right, and so then /refreshes is basically telling the Power BI service to trigger a refresh on that data set. Again, you're going to pass in your bearer access token in the authorization header. So it should be bearer and then space and the access token. This is pretty much universal across the board. And then the JSON body is irrelevant, but I've found that you do need one, otherwise it will error out. So that's what I put. So you can put whatever you want in there. There's an amazing presenter, whatever you want to put up there. Okay, so let's say that we trigger a data set refresh. Data set refresh could take 2 seconds, it could take 2 hours, just depends on your data set, right? So let's say that you want to know whether or not that data set finished, right? So you've got all your source systems, and then it comes into your data warehouse on a nightly batch job, maybe, let's say, and then you want to refresh your Power BI data sets. And maybe you've got a team that monitors all that batch job 24/7, right? So like my company, we have that. And I want to be able to report whether all of that job, including the data set refresh, completed successfully. So I want to know when it's done and whether or not it completed successfully. So what you can do is you would send a GET call to the same URL. You would add the parameter top equals 1 to the end of the URL. So you can leave that off and it would give you the last end number of refreshes. But you say and top equals 1, and that would give you the most recent refresh, so the one that is still ongoing, unless it finished very, very quickly. Again, bearer access token, and so what I would probably do is put this inside a do until loop. While the refresh is still ongoing, this data is, quote, unknown, and otherwise it will return, I believe, success or failure, if I remember correctly. So you would just wait until the status no longer says unknown. You can re-query this every 30, 60 seconds, 5 minutes, whatever's appropriate for you. You can query it as often as you want. And then you have a couple of options. You could basically take the status, once the status says something other than unknown, you can return that status to your outer calling nightly batch job, right? Or one thing, sometimes the data sets will fail to refresh for just some random, strange reason, query times out, network error, right? And so you can sometimes all it needs is somebody just hit the refresh button. You can just have a try again option in here, right? It's like if it fails, try again one time, try again maybe twice, because do you want to get called at 3 o'clock in the morning because all somebody had to do was hit a refresh button? Might be a way to just kind of make your life a little bit easier. Yeah, so there's just some options that you can add a little bit of complexity to this. All right. Let's say that you want to run a query against your data set. So again, this would be an option if you are an independent software vendor. For example, you want to pull some data out of a Power BI data set and populate that into your application. Or something that I do is Power BI will collect telemetry on your app. So who's actually looking at my reporting? What reports, what report pages, when. And so I want to see, are my reports actually getting looked at? Are people actually using them, right? And so there's a couple of problems with this reporting that's native in Power BI. One problem is that they have one usage metrics report data set per workspace, so I can't see it aggregated across all of my projects, all of my reporting, which I would want to do. And it also only keeps that data for 30 days. What if I want to see over a longer period of time than that? So I want to internalize that data. So that data exists in the Power BI service natively, so that's where I want to pull it out of. So how do I get it? Also, I have a nightly job that will run some PowerShell scripts that's in this call and will get and we'll run a DAX query, right? So this is the JSON request body that you would send. You can see that the query is inside of this text string here, so we evaluate date in this example. So this would return the entire date table. I will say one caveat, so I do a lot of Power BI development, and I always encourage my team members and anybody that I train that the data sets should be customer facing. So please don't hate me, developers, for saying this, but they should have proper capitalization, spacing, and the names, because we want to promote self-service analytics, and I want the data set, the things that the customer's going to see, to be friendly, right? To not be in camel case or Pascal case. I want it to be very comfortable, right? Not underscores and so forth. When you put spaces in your table names, it is really going to throw this for a loop, because you're going to have single quotes inside of double quotes, and you're going to have a lot of fun with escaping text characters, or just don't put spaces in your table names. So if you know you're going to be using a lot of API DAX, API calls and DAX queries, then you can just avoid that technique also. So this is what's going to come back to send the results in JSON. So imagine you have a very, very small date table, 1 row and 4 columns. So this is what that would look like. So this would be a date table with 1 row for January 1st, 2025, and so in column date, year, month, and day. So this is a very small result set. You can imagine that this can become very, very large. You would need some sort of tool that's going to flatten this out, right? So you would need something that's going to take this JSON and convert it into a tabular form and then write that out to CSV or Parquet or what have you. So most any tools that is going to run this can handle that for you. All right. So one of the options that you can do if you're a developer is that you can use role of security embedding. And so one of the nice things about Power BI role of security, it means that a person can only see the rows that they are entitled to see. And so you can basically sort of imprint a person's identity onto the requests that they are getting. And so so this is the URL you would add. So basically after the my org part, so I'm sort of truncating the rest of that URL. And so this would go and grab that report, and then you would pass this JSON in the body that would then say, just mimic this as if this was Jane at Tenet.com and mimic her identity, and so you would get the results as she would see it. And so you can so the way that embedding works, it typically sort of bypasses the role of security. This would layer that role of security back into it. You can take advantage of some automated deployment pipelines. This is really useful if you're an independent software vendor and you want to roll out new reporting to your clients. So you can certainly leverage the in-service deployment pipelines if you want to do that. So this is how you can reference the source stage order. So you would deploy from dev to QA. So you would reference it from the stage that you're deploying from. So in this case, the source stage order 0, so that would be your development environment. Doesn't really matter what they're called though. And you can deploy all of them. So you can deploy everything that's in one workspace to the subsequent workspace. But there's also a way that you can specify the exact artifacts in each workspace that you want to move forward. So you can cherry pick object by object, not line by line. You can cherry pick specific objects that you want to deploy. And you can also trigger whether or not you want to update the app in the downstream workspace, right? So it won't actually show up in the app unless you update the app workspace. When you do this, sometimes you can have a problem that a report is pointing at the wrong data set. The service, if you're just naturally in the service, you're not an independent software vendor, the Power BI service typically takes care of this for you. But when you're doing this via API or PowerShell or something, sometimes the report can point to the wrong data set. And so this is a way that you can rebind that report to a new data set. So you just have to tell it the data set ID for the data set that you want it to point to. And then obviously put the report ID in the URL. All right. So first of all, can I just pause for a second? I just want to get a baseline on your all sort of familiarity with Power BI. Is this helpful for you guys? I'm sort of blazing through this. Yeah.
I have a question actually.
Yeah, please.
If you have come across, was there any scenario where you had to issue an update statement to the SQL Server from the Power BI? If yes, how did you achieve it? If not, is there any other possibility?
So you want to do like a write back, for example?
Yeah.
Yeah. So great question. So there are a couple ways that you would do this. There are sort of two flavors of the same thing. So the way that we've been able to do this for a little while is using Power Apps, actually. You build a Power App that would do the write back. You might also use Power Automate I'm not a power.
That's okay. It wasn't, yeah, we can do with Power Apps and Power Automate,
Yeah.
but was it available from the Power BI? Can you do it from Power BI?
So the other option, which is brand new, and I actually haven't been able to try this myself, is that in Fabric they have initiated user-defined functions, which is a Python is a Python script. It's very similar to SQL UDFs. And so similar sort of use case, and my understanding is that from that you should be able to do write back, and you would trigger those inside of Power BI reports. I haven't had the opportunity to test that, but that's the promise that people have made with the new Fabric UDFs.
So can you run through once again? From Power BI,
Yeah.
so you call Fabric, sorry, you call it as function. Can you call, you have to call a function basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you would write a Python function.
Oh, Python function. Okay.
Yeah. And I think it needs to be backed by Fabric capacity. And so my company, we use Premium, but we haven't upgraded to Fabric yet.
Okay.
So I haven't personally had a chance to test this, but I've just seen some of the stuff online about it. But that's the promise of Fabric UDFs is that it should allow you so what they do. There's a new slicer called a text slicer, and you literally just type.
Yeah.
And so what you do is you type something into that. And then you have a button that would trigger the UDF. It's going to pull that from the text slicer, and then it does whatever the UDF tells it to do, which would presumably be some kind of write back.
So what I was trying to achieve is like when you see the report in the Power BI, if one of the particular row has a valid information, I just wanted to click that row and goes into some other system to record that particular details.
Yeah.
So that's what I was trying to achieve.
Okay.
Which was pretty tricky.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I'll try.
you bring up an interesting, or you give me an interesting idea, which is I wonder if you could trigger these APIs in Python.
Exactly. That's what I was trying to see. Does the APIs has any of those features? So.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I would love to test that.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Please. Yeah.
On the subject here. So you can grab functions in the semantic model, right?
Sorry, once again?
You can grab functions in the semantic model, right? In SQL? I believe you can. Like T-SQL functions, you can put those inside the semantic model.
You can call a UDF in a native SQL query in a Power Query step, yes.
Yes, sorry, that's what I was referring to.
Yeah.
Could you just pass in whatever value you selected as a parameter in the function and then use that?
So the problem is you have to refresh the data set in order to do that. You have to trigger the data set refresh. So
Okay, at that point, yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
It was just a thought.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
That's a good one.
I like that. Okay, cool. So admins are they do the Lord's work. I'm grateful I don't have to do it. I'm grateful to my admin for keeping everything secure. They keep me in line because I'm always trying to do something new, and then they get frustrated because I'm asking them to, I'm always sort of pushing the boundaries with them. But they're always overtaxed, and they need ways to do things in a more streamlined, more efficient manner. And so these are some of the things that we can help them with. So we can definitely help them with some tenant-wide governance. They can pull reports on what people are doing, and they can monitor for refresh failures, capacity utilizations, and they can do a lot of these things in very automated ways. So one thing that they can do is they can list and restore workspaces. So if you just want to just take a simple snapshot of all the workspaces in your organization, so you can get that. And then you can also restore or sort of undelete workspaces that have been deleted. So if it gets deleted by accident, you can bring it back to life. And there's a limit, I think 30, maybe 60 days on how long you have to do that. You can also, so this is the one that I sort of had to go to my admin hat in hand, and can you imagine, you're Power BI admin, and I'm going to him and I'm saying, hey, would you please run this PowerShell script for me? I promise it won't do anything bad. They didn't love it, but they worked with me. So the scenario here is, if Bob builds a deployment pipeline and then assigns a workspace to it that I own, or that maybe we jointly own, right? And then Bob leaves, I can't get access to that deployment pipeline. And the problem is that deployment pipeline is still out there, even if nobody can access it. My workspace is still assigned to that deployment pipeline, and so now I can't do anything with it. I can't move that workspace to a different deployment pipeline. I can't operate the deployment pipeline. And so I needed to have the admins go in here and update the user base for that pipeline. And so this is how you can do it. You really can't do it in the GUI. Even the admins can't go into the GUI and do this because they don't have access to the pipeline either. So that they can do it through either PowerShell or through the API. You can also you can get a list of all the data sets that are in your tenant and all the data sets that are within a workspace. So in the second example here, you're basically sort of adding groups, and then the workspace ID is essentially a filter, nearly. But so this is how you can get either all the data sets in your entire tenant or all the data sets within a given workspace. And you can also, for a data set, you can also list out all the data sources that are within the data set. So what I saw one person do was he wanted to get all of the data sets, and then for each data set, all of the data sources. And so he would pull this nightly, and it was sort of a snapshot of how data is moving through his organization, at least within the realm of Power BI. Personally, I didn't really think it was super actionable, but hey, it's something he wanted to do. You can also get a list of all the reports in your workspace, and you can list it by group as well. The reason I keep bringing up the list it by groups, so if you have a lot of development QA workspaces, you might not care about those, right? So you might just want to list out certain workspaces that you know are production or high value workspaces. You can get activity logs as well. So again, this is sort of seeing who's refreshing what, who's going to look at what data sets and so forth. You can just say /activity events and you'll get a ton of stuff, or you can add start date time and end date times to filter that down. And so if you know the time frame that you're looking at. You can also monitor and manage data set refreshes. So these are ones that we've actually already seen, but imagine it from an admin perspective that you can watch out for failed refreshes. You can trigger automated messaging to teams to go deal with that, or you can just trigger an automatic refresh so that anytime a data set fails, you trigger a refresh maybe once, for example, and then it sends out an email, so that that could definitely make people's lives a bit easier. You can clean up any orphaned workspaces. So again, this is the sort of thing, somebody builds a workspace, nobody's looking at it, then the team leaves, and it's just the workspace is out there, it's taking up space, but no one's getting any value from it. So you can use this to go find any of the workspaces that are still active, and then you would use this to list out the users that are in that workspace, and if the user list returns, returns a blank list, then you know that nobody actually has access to that workspace. And then you get to do that in an iterative fashion. You might do this, say, like once a month or something, for example, and you can also go and delete any old workspaces that are no longer needed. So this is something, this is just a cleanup process you might do periodically, a few times a year, for example. All right, so for anyone who wants to learn more about the API, so quick call out. So for the data set refreshes and for the DAX queries, there's a lot of stuff online, a lot of blogs. For the rest of these, the literature is a little bit thin, honestly, which means that you might have a hard time finding content, but moreover, if you ask an LLM, if you ask ChatGPT, they're going to be trained over a very thin amount of material, meaning that they are very, very prone to hallucinate when it comes to any of these API calls, and specific API calls that are beyond just data set refreshes and DAX queries. They're going to get those pretty right. But when I was researching for this presentation, it would convincingly just make up stuff that just plainly isn't there. And I literally had to ask it a few times. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to need links for everything. And then sometimes it would just send me a link to something that was completely different. I'd be like, yeah, you made this up, didn't you? Like, yeah, I made it up. So these are the Microsoft Learn pages for Power BI APIs specifically, and they've got a whole subsection on admin APIs, tons and tons of stuff there if you are a tenant admin. If you want to learn about executing DAX queries, because particularly if you're an ISV, I think there's a lot of value there. And then obviously Postman for any of your API testing. All right. Well, that's what I've got for you guys today. So I'll give you guys 15 minutes back, and I'm open for any questions that you might have. All right. Yeah, Charles.
I guess just out of curiosity, with the APIs, have you run across any, I guess, limitations on how many calls you can make per hour?
I have not personally. I'm not sure if there is a limit. There might be. I think he does make a lot. So, yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. Good question. I'm not sure. I feel like an independent software vendor might have that problem, but I don't think I would ever have enough that I would run into the problem. If I were doing like DAX queries and then getting one result and immediately like another query, then that might do it. I would have to think that the limits would be in the thousands or tens of thousands of calls a day. I would hope. I would suspect.
Okay.
If you have a fabric capacity, I think it would just go against that, wouldn't it?
I would think so. Yeah. So
Probably something similar with Power BI.
yeah. So if you're triggering, actually, it's a funny story. So I told you guys about the DAX queries that would go get the telemetry, the usage reporting, and store that in a database. And so we gave this to they call it a top associate. It's a rotational program, so she's very young. She's like 22 years old, right, fresh out of college. And so we're giving this to her, and she's doing some Googling and so forth. And so we had it. We're looking at about 22 or so production workspaces. And so she was supposed to be running queries against those 22 workspaces. Well, so what she did was she triggered data set refreshes for every data set in each of those 22 production workspaces and shut down our fabric capacity for the entire org because we only have one fabric capacity. And yeah, so we definitely got a few phone calls about that. So, it's a whoopsie. You live and you learn, right? She just made a mistake. But yeah, so what it would do, in that specific instance, it jammed up that capacity. The capacity, Microsoft will let you spike your capacity for a very brief period of time. But imagine triggering that many data set refreshes all at once, and basically the capacity was just jammed up. And so what you do is you wind up creating a queue, right? And so it just keeps trying to refresh, right? And so it just spikes, it jams up, and then everything just like backlogs, right? And so so we had to go through and like one by one like manually kill every one of those refreshes, and even then you still had to let all the rest of the stuff that from everybody else sort of run through that buffer. So it took a little while, and yeah. So but life moves on, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you asked, why do you think documentation is so sparse? It's not for lack of a user base, I imagine, right? Or is it?
I would think it probably is, actually. So developers are very, very comfortable with this sort of thing. So you just noticed, like, I sped through a lot of things because of, you guys are developers more than Power BI developers.
As long as I go off, basic RESTful API, and maybe go to OData, the top one, stuff
Yeah.
like that.
I think for much of the audience in this room, what I cover is probably pretty basic stuff. For Power BI developers, this is designed to be like a very advanced technique. I don't think that there's a lot of people who are making their own API calls who are doing this sort of thing. The data set refresh, there's a Power Automate tool that will do this. I think that people do leverage that because there's just a lot of value in being able to refresh your data sets, but also Power Automate is just really simple versus say like spinning up a Python application and some hosting environment and figuring all this out yourself. I mean, that's what I did. Like I figured it all out myself because that's who I am, I guess. But I think for somebody who's like savvy in Excel and then graduates to Power BI, they're a million miles away from writing Python scripts.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Which, I mean, just to be fair, like, that was me. Like, I was the guy who was just like super good in Excel, and then like I moved on to Power BI, and then Python scripts
Yeah.
and API
I mean,
calls.
it just feels like pretty low barrier to be able to provide enough information so that you can ask an LMS to basically produce you like, basic scripts to do this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
And actually not have it hallucinate something out there where you're, if you are coming in from the Excel background where you're like, okay, and I'm stuck, and I think progress.
So the dataset refresh, I think ChatGPT, for example, would do a great job. But there are other places where it definitely did make some things. Like it gave me functions that just don't exist. Well, thank you guys. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.